So there's a lot to talk about, I guess. Thomas, what were your first impressions before you came, or before you started to work on these workshops?
I mean, well, first of all, thanks everybody for coming out. It's been a really dynamic and interesting couple of days. Very action-packed. I mean, the benefit that we had of working with filmmakers who have not made their films yet is that we were able to discuss in the abstract what we felt would be an interesting approach to storytelling. And I think that one of the misconceptions people have about composers and music supervisors, or people who do both, is that ultimately we're storytellers. Our job is to figure out ways of telling stories with music and working with all of the collaborators, whether it's the director, the editor, sometimes the producers, all the different parts of the film project, and finding ways of being able to facilitate the storytelling process with music, especially at the end when we're in post-production, and all the ideas of what the film could have been and what the script could have been if there hadn't been budget constraints, or it hadn't rained that day, or that actor hadn't been a pissy ant that day. All of these little limitations that you end up having, and somehow the music team is there to find a way to paint over the sections, to tell the story effectively, to help move everything along so you don't notice any of those limitations, and people feel really good about the final product. And I would imagine for you, when I think about your work, you've worked in both worlds, sort of.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about how you see the differences of the roles for music. I'm sorry, I'm becoming the interviewer.
That's okay. Welcome everyone. Thanks for coming out. Yeah, working on both ends. I mean, basically, really, what Thomas was touching upon, our key component, apart from storytelling, is having a way to communicate and finding ways to communicate with directors, producers who don't necessarily have the skill of the music language, or they haven't mastered it. And it's really, we were sort of the bridge, basically. And as far as composing and music supervision, it's really different, but it goes for the same purpose, and which is to fulfill emotionally a project and give that certain emotional impact that is not overbearing, but it really helps the storyline. And there are so many creative ways to come up with this. And I mean, this is our.
I mean, how many of you know what a music supervisor does? Anybody? A few. Well, for those that don't, I mean, basically, the music supervisor is essentially the head of the music department. So it's their job to help navigate the music approach to a film or a TV show or a video game or anything else. Sometimes that involves hiring the composer or bringing composer options in. Sometimes it involves just doing clearances of specific songs. Sometimes it's the creative selection of song placements. Sometimes it's going to be the strategy of the overall view of it, how we will place music throughout. Will it be score? Will it be source, meaning a song? Will it be an original piece of music that's being built? If we're doing a musical, we're going to be basically bringing in songwriters potentially, bringing in artists for the performances. We produce those performances. We have to bring all those elements in. Then everything gets brought down to the mixing stage, where we are sort of supervising the music process and making sure that music is mixed at the right levels, it is highlighted in the right way. And in many ways, we're always advocates for story. So unlike an advocate for music on a stage, we're not there to make the music louder, we're there to make the music just at the right level, to make sure that it's never overshadowing story. So if a sequence is more effective with sound design, footsteps, the sound of a jacket rubbing, that might be more effective. And those are the moments when the supervisor has to be able to say, let's bring the music down here because I want to be closer to them, and it just needs to run all the way through. So in many ways, we have to always think about story first. How do we tell the story most effectively, and how do we bring the best resources in? That involves finances, how much money do we have to work with, schedule, how much time do we have to work with, personalities, who are the right people to work on this. Sometimes a composer works by themselves and just wants to send it out and doesn't want to communicate too much. That can work really well in some projects, but sometimes you have a director that wants to show up in the studio, hover over the composer and say, no, I want it in B flat. And so you have to say, I have a composer that loves to do that and wants to have the, wants to collaborate very closely with the composer. That's a good match. And we have to always know that ahead of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the music supervisor is really a music producer. I mean, the department of music belongs to the supervisor. And the supervisor needs to make sure that the director and the producers are happy with the result and also the story, which is the quintessential moment. I mean, that's what it is. It's really about the story and it's really about the film itself. So when you're thinking about music supervision, it's a very complicated, a very complex job. And on this part of the world, we unfortunately we don't have the budget for a lot of productions to afford the music supervisor. But it's really, for filmmakers, it's really a big ease. Just to make sure that you are legally covered. I mean, we are, as music supervisor, we need to make sure that everything, whatever goes onto screen and onto television, is legally cleared. If somebody samples something, you hear it because you're a musician, and you're like, oh, come on, guys, I mean, that's gonna cost. And then at least there is an option for the producers to make that creative choice to license that piece, or they can say, hey, can we just replace it somehow? And then that's what it is. I mean, it's basically making sure that everything that goes onto the film not only musically presents itself, but also from a legal point of view, and with contracts and with everything. I mean, we work with lawyers too. And when Thomas is talking about the budget, a music supervisor has a number. We do create a contingency of some, I usually create a 10% for myself. And then we are the ones who formed and shaped the whole musical budget of a TV series. And if there are 50 songs in that series, you need to know exactly where the money goes and how the money goes.
And what do you feel about the creative part of the process? It looks like as if it's a bit more difficult to give up for the director, or give away a tiny bit of it, because it's their domain to find direction musically for the projects. How did you feel about this? Was it easy to establish your position, so to say, in the work?
I mean, I think it depends on, each director is a little bit different. And part of a supervisor's job is to know when you let someone else make the choices, and sometimes make the mistakes. Because I've worked with directors before who've been very insistent on very specific choices. What I end up doing is saying, okay, if you want James Brown and you want, all of these expensive big songs, here's what they're going to cost. And that means when it comes to all these other sequences, they're going to have to all be library. And I'll let you know what those library costs are. And pretty soon they become realistic and say, wow, we can actually do this. Because I think the difficulty is that most directors go with what they know, right? And what most directors know is what everybody knows. If you've recognized that song, if you can hum it immediately, you probably can't afford it. So, in a sense, the supervisor's job is to be able to say, okay, let's strategize. What is really important? When is the song really important to the storytelling? And when is it something that you just indulgently want? If we're in a bar and you really want to hear ZZ Top, you have to say, is this worth $40,000 or $80,000 or whatever the amount of money is? And you might say, you know what? Is there anything that sounds like ZZ Top that kind of does this? We can find things that kind of have that energy, but then we can also go further and say, you know what? There's an interesting edge between these two characters. And if we find something that has a little bit of a classic rock feel, but it's a bit more jagged and has a little bit more of a truncated feel to it, now that conversation is more dynamic. The whole situation is more dynamic. It's a bit more dangerous. And we can play up the vulnerability of one of the characters in that conversation simply by choosing a background song that has an interesting energy, and we did it reasonably priced. So our job is to also know when to step in and when not to step in. If I bring a composer on board and they have great communication with the director, it's my job to not get in the way and to just make sure that they have their communication and it works well. If there's a breakdown in communication, either one of them can come to me and say, hey, I don't think I understand what they're looking for. Or I don't think I can communicate what I want, or I'm not getting what I want from that communication. Then it's my job to come in and say, all right, let's figure out a way to do this because we're all solving the problem together. So maybe it's a situation where the director knows a little too much about music. And they're in a situation where they're kind of giving you musical cues instead of emotional cues. So you're following the directive of their musical cues, but the truth is they need emotional cues because now the emotion's getting lost.
That's a great point.
So I think that's sort of, we're in between. And on the budget situation, sorry to cut you off, but I was going to say, most music supervisors have worked for very little money on their first projects. Many of them have had other jobs. So I would say, I would encourage people who are interested in this field to just work for free, get paid on something else, and find filmmakers that you love and offer your support to them. If you can build a career with them, as their films get bigger and bigger, you can start getting paid as well. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in it, find a way to do the work. Like, I did so much work for free over the years, and it's frustrating when I think about not getting paid. But the truth is, I always found another way because this is work I really loved. And I think that supervisors' careers get built on activity, on doing the job. And eventually, if the work is good, you'll start getting paid for it.
How did you become one?
I came at it from radio. I was in Los Angeles at a radio station called KCRW, and I had a radio show, and I did a lot of, I used to do imaginary soundtracks to shows. So I would choose a film like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and I would select little bits of dialogue that would help to tell that story. I was telling stories with music already, and somebody had said, why don't you look into A&R, which is artists and repertoires when you bring artists to a label. But I realized that I would fail miserably at it because the bands that I loved never made any money for anybody. So I just thought that's the fastest way for me to fail. And someone else said, why don't you look into music supervision? And I said, well, what is that? And they said, well, basically you are helping to tell stories with directors or producers and helping to navigate the sound of these projects. So I worked as an intern for a couple of years and then went independent, did 2 films, a documentary and then a feature film, and then looked at a pilot and was very excited to read that pilot, and that pilot turned out to be 6 Feet Under, the HBO series. And I worked with my partner Gary Calamar on that. We split apart at the end of that, and then later on I worked on Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead and Better Call Saul and The Killing and Halt and Catch Fire and many, many other TV shows and films over the years. So it just developed and evolved over the course of time. But a lot of it was just luck. Just being in the right place at the right time and working my ass off.
Cool. And you, Adam, how did you become a supervisor? And what would your advice be if anyone wants to pursue this profession here?
Yeah, this is first of all, it's really a fun job, and it's a call. It's really something that you want to invest emotionally into.
It's like a priest work.
Yeah. I come from the composer side. I'm a composer by trade. And I became a music supervisor out of necessity, basically. I was working on an HBO show about 6 years ago in Romania, and they had a lot of songs, but they didn't know how to clear, and basically they needed options for me to present them, and that's when the music supervision aspect of a composer creeps in. And basically, I've been working on shows. Now it's sort of like with the feature films that I'm doing. I'm also music producing, just like Thomas is music producing. So for features, now I'm sort of known as the guy who composes and also does the music supervision. So takes care of the creative, presents the creative choices for the director and the producers, and that's how I became, basically with the HBO, the Umbre series, Shadows, and there were about 60 songs that we needed to clear, and I cleared out of 10 countries the soundtrack, and that was the school for me, really.
And is it much different to work in projects here in Europe or in the States?
I think it is, yeah. I mean, basically, it's in the States there is a proper music department, and how many of you know the role of a music editor?
Not a one.
Not a one. All right. So, can you tell a little bit about the music editor
Sure.
job? Because this is something that we don't have here.
Yeah, I think, you know, what Adam's describing is, in a weird way, we all become hermaphrodites when we are in small projects, because we are the composer and the music supervisor, and we're the lawyer, and we're the psychologist, and we're the, you know, all of these things at once. As you get into more developed projects, you start to break those jobs down. One of the benefits of breaking those jobs down is for the director. You had asked about how do you deal with the director. A lot of times directors are making choices about music, but they don't necessarily have objectivity. They're bringing some of their own personal history, their own personal taste, their own lack of knowledge about the clearances and so forth. And so, in a way, we can come into the equation and begin to start breaking down what are strategic, smart ways of sticking to the storytelling, taking their vision, and finding a way to make it work within the budget and the time constraints. What the music editors do is they become an additional party to this process, because if you're the director and you say, I want this song, and I've got a few other options I'm going to give you which are more financially affordable, I need to be able to find a way to present those ideas in a way where you are going to respond well to it. Now, if I put them in and I have my music editor do a really good job at cutting your choices in, but mine work even better somehow, or they work equally, then they can look at that objectively and say, you know what, I don't know if this is as important as I thought it was. How much less is it? And you're like, it's $40,000 less. And we can now afford to do this montage piece or build this original song that you had in mind. So it's a way of me being able to have someone else that has an objective view, and they cut the actual song to fit the picture. If you think about it, much of filmmaking is creating invisibility. So the editor makes it you don't notice that you're switching from perspective left and right. You know, the actors make it seem like they didn't shoot it in 15 different days, you know, out of order and all that. The music supervisor has to make it seem like everything is flowing naturally through, and a 5-minute song became a 2.5-minute sequence invisibly. So a music editor is really good at finding a way of saying, okay, we're going to use our first 10 seconds of the intro, we could shave that down to 5. We'll lose a measure. Now we're going to go to the first verse. We're not going to go to the second verse. We're going to go to the chorus, then we're going to go to the bridge, and then we're going to go out. Now a 4-minute song feels like a full song, but it operates in a much shorter period of time. And it can more effectively do that. And it's one more perspective that will help me see a better idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big differences between here in Europe and in the States is that in Europe, and especially in Hungary, it's really the director and the editors who make musical choices for the temp. In America, it's really the music supervisor and the music editor who help shaping. You know, you ask the director, what kind of feel do you want? And then the music editor will build a temp score for you for the emotional impact that will be presented to the composer and not the editor. Because sometimes when the editor chooses, I love editors, really do, but when they choose something, they are really, you know, stuck to that idea. And it becomes quite a challenge for the composer to replace that, because it's temp love, and you know, that's exactly what Thomas was saying. There is one more perspective of another person's opinion, and that's why it's a very important job.
And actually, the point that you made is a huge one. When people are temping projects, and usually an editor is the first one in, right? Because the editor is in, the dailies are coming in, they're starting to assemble the piece. They want to start to shape it more correctly. On most TV projects that I work on, the editors reach out to me and say, hey, I need a few things for this background. Probably I've already assembled them and sent them over to them, but the idea being that when they go through, they now know, oh, for a background jukebox, I've got this folder. It's all cleared at $3,000 all in, very inexpensive. Here is $1,000 all in, and then here are some featured song sequences that they can utilize that I'll pursue the clearances in. If they say, oh, I couldn't find anything in the $3,000 bin, but I found something in the $1,000 bin, is it okay? Yes, God bless you, save us $2,000. Use it. Let's find a way to keep it in there. Eventually, as the director comes in and the producers come in, they will then look at the cut, and if they go in and they say, wow, what's with this crappy sounding music inside the bar? You're like, okay, let's go to the other bin and get something else in there, or we'll find something else that might work.
And it's Thomas is making a very important point, that the directors actually come in and listen to something that's already being selected by a music professional. Mm-hmm. And that's very important.
That way you're not getting in trouble.
Yeah, so we're music festival primarily with a lot of bands around and musicians, and I guess it was good for them to see some of the considerations that are being made behind the scenes. What would your advice be for bands from the region or from the area if they wanted to get in either an American show or shows around Europe? Who they would have to be friends with and how?
Being friends with you helps, I think.
Yeah.
I think having a good licensing professional is a really helpful thing. The difficulty for supervisors, and there are probably about 250 of us worldwide. There's about 50 of us who are really active. It's a very small group. We are bombarded with music all the time. So we frequently will turn to a licensing professional as someone who says, I know this artist, I know the ownership of it, I have a relationship with the publisher. Either it's a one-stop, meaning I can clear everything, publisher and master. Do you guys know about master and publishing? Okay, let's explain that. So for every song that we may want to license, this is what Adam had mentioned earlier, you have to go through a business transaction because I'm taking your copyright and placing it into a new copyright. That means I have to get permission. Permission comes in two halves. One half is the person that wrote the song. Let's say it's the Beatles' Blackbird, that's written by Lennon and McCartney. Then you have whoever recorded the version of it, and if it's another artist, we go to the label or whoever owns that recording. If it's the artist themselves, we license it from them. If it's the label, we license it from them. Whoever is the party that owns that master recording and that publisher, both of which have to be cleared. In the case of a Beatles song, you can expect that the Beatles song will be very expensive in the publishing and might be very reasonable on the master side because one is sort of more renowned than the other. But the idea being that you have to clear both. So for music supervisors, we have to find out what the songs are, pre-clear them or clear them, present them, and then go through the proper licensing process. So every song can have multiple publishers and multiple people that have to get approvals. If a songwriter is dead or if the performer is dead, we have estates we have to deal with, which means that a lot of our job is negotiating with many different parties and convincing them that the project that we're doing is worthy of their time and their project being a part of, and that the budget that we have is what we have. So it's a pretty complicated process.
In the States it's really structured and people can know the way at least how it works, but in Europe or in this region where it's less structured, I would say, more it's up to the network, I guess. What would your advice be, Adam?
I would say that for the bands and for the managers of the bands, just keep in touch with the creatives, with the film people. Really, it's a different story here in Europe, and it's good to know the director. It's really good to know the producers and editors, and that's how it is. The licensing professionals, once again, which are in our case are the labels basically here in Europe. So if you're a Hungarian band, I would say go to the labels, the ones that are publishing, and even if they don't publish you or they don't put out your CD, they'll be aware, and there will be a time when you can use that connection.
I would say also one of the things that's really important for anybody who's working in any type of media is knowing that the people have done their professional work. So for example, if someone sends me an email and says, oh, I heard you speak at BuSH and I have a band, I'd love to get it in front of you. One of the first things I'm going to be checking is if they send me a file, a download link, please never attach an MP3 to an email. Never, 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 never. I've literally had important emails that couldn't come through because someone decided to send me a whole slew of MP3s attached to emails and jammed up the box. Always send download links. But number two, make sure you have your metadata in there. Do you guys know what metadata is? Nobody knows metadata. Somebody. All right. Metadata is essentially the information that is part of the digital file. So if I have a high quality MP3 with your song in it, I need to know the title of the song, the artist who's there, what album it's from, what year it's from, also who is the licensing contact. Like if I know that I can reach out to one person and it says one stop, that means I can go to that person to clear the publishing and the label. That's sexy. Because now I know I can go to that person and say, I have $5,000, can we make this work? And if they say yes, fantastic. They say no, then I'll say, what kind of numbers are we looking at for this? And then I can say, yeah, it's beyond my budget, but I'll come back to you because I really like the music. Now I know I've got somebody who's a professional, they can give me a real sense of it, and I can work with that. Genre information is fine and lovely, but genres are pretty abstract and everybody thinks they do psychedelia, so it's like, okay, whatever. But the idea being that having information about, and again, I view an MP3 as being a presentation of you. If you're an artist, if you have artwork and it's a really cute picture of you with your dog, I want that picture of you with your dog on that thing. So when I pop it into my, music system, I'll be like, oh, it's that dude with the dog. And then I'll have the track, and I'll listen to it, and I have my own emotional relationship with it. And to me, it's a color. Everything with music it's a paint color. I now know I have an interesting color that I can utilize for this sequence. And our brains operate like card catalogs. We have so much in our heads that sometimes you're like, I don't know where it is, bing, there it is. And then poof, you put it in, and frequently it lands beautifully. So the trick is, if you've got your business together, and I know that you have high quality MP3s, I know who I can license it from, I have the contact information, email, phone number in the grouping section, that is gold. Because now I know, or if you have a major publisher, that could be fine too. Because if you say, well, I wrote the song with a friend of mine, they're tied to Universal Music Publishing or Sony or whomever. Now, if it's 3 in the morning when I'll find something, I can reach out to the UK counterpart and say, hey, I'd love to pitch this. I only have $5,000 for this. Do you think this can fly? That UMPG person can say, we don't clear for that. That will save me the trouble of now selecting a song, sending it to my music editor, who will then cut the song, deliver a QuickTime of that file to me to review, possibly edit again, then send it off to the producers to have them look at it and then agree on it. And if I can't clear it, I'm in a bad situation. Nothing a director wants less than hearing something that they love and then finding out that they can't afford it, or it's unclearable, or there's a sample, all those things. If you have samples inside your music, let us know. Just say, here are the samples, and let us know that they're cleared. If they're not cleared, I wouldn't even send it, because we may not go through the effort of trying to clear the sample for the track. I've had it a few times where someone sent me a great song, there was a sample in there, they hadn't cleared it for the release, and then the people who had the original sample will not license it to me because they don't want to reward the artist for putting an uncleared sample into their song. So in a way, if you have samples in your music, take it out. And if you think that we're not going to hear it, we will. Don't do it.
Do you ever go and hunt music on your own? Like go and search in blogs or on
Constantly.
YouTube or whatever?
Constantly. Yeah? Most of what I license, I found. So I'd say probably about 30% of what gets placed into the shows is something that's been pitched to me. Almost everything else was found somewhere.
Where do you go and find songs?
Everywhere, everywhere. I mean, we live in such a magical time now. There's blogs everywhere. Like I literally will go into Cyrillic, websites where I don't read Cyrillic, but thanks to Google Translate, I get at least a vague idea of who's involved and what the song's about and so forth. The nice thing is that we live in a golden time for finding music. And for Better Call Saul, which I work on, and for most of my projects, having something that's unusual holds up really well. We did a show called Shut Eye for a while, which was largely gypsy music, mostly from Eastern Europe. Trying to clear those songs was not easy, but my God, it was worth the effort when we found something. We were able to get the right people involved. And we knew that, there's like a 70-year-old man who's like a, gypsy clarinet guy. Like, how did you find me? And where does the money show up, So it's like one of those things where it can be incredibly rewarding because your extra effort pulled something nobody has heard before, placed it into a context where it was magic, and the artist got a chance to bring some revenue in and got to be part of something that they can talk about at the bar.
It's really another really fun aspect of music supervision is when you actually can be a part of the creation process. When there is an existing band and there is a song that they like, the directors and the producers like, but they want something different, then you'll have a way to communicate and collaborate with the band, with artists, and explain them the emotional impact that you're trying to get for that scene. And if they come up with something new, that's that you feel great about that.
Yeah, I mean every problem is an opportunity. So when you can't afford something, there's always an opportunity to find something else. And especially when you're working with artists, like I've been doing quite a bit more lately, there's a great joy in that, because you know that if somebody's coming to the table and they want to work with you, you know, hopefully they're worth the time that I'm putting in to walk through the creative process, and hopefully our project is worth their time in creating the work. But at the end of the day, you create really exciting and beautiful things in that process. And I think for artists, it can be one of the most exciting shifts. Whether it makes them more famous or more money, who knows? But the collaboration and being part of the art is really the reward of its own.
Absolutely.
Actually, that's a good point. Like, what's the reality nowadays? Have, you know, a band gets to a bigger show, does it affect their career in any ways? What's your experience?
Sia.
I mean, in some situations, yes, some no. I mean, like the Sia thing has been brought up before. This is 6 Feet Under. The closing song for the 6 Feet Under series was a song by an artist named Sia called Breathe Me. She was an Australian artist that wasn't that well known outside of Australia up to that point. But the truth is that Sia was going to be famous anyway. We just happened to be there early. So I don't really buy the whole thing of music supervisors making artists' careers. I think that if somebody has talent, we might be there early, but I don't think ultimately Sia would be sitting in Australia in a bar singing because, you know, her talent was going to shine through regardless. As far as the money goes, it really depends. I don't think it's to me, licensing is serendipity, and that means you don't know whether it will happen or won't happen, but a series of things have to come into play. I never fully understand how artists can rely upon sync money, because as you and I both know, there's so many factors that come into play between liking a song, pitching a song, and licensing a song, getting it to the finish line. If you think we go through, like for any scene, I will go through probably 100 options. I'll narrow that down to probably 25, of which 10 of them will get cut down into individual quick times that will be presented. And then of those 10, I'm going to narrow that down to the 5 strongest options and then present those. So it's narrowing, 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 narrowing. You could easily be in a heroic position for being part of the first 100, but you won't make it down to the final 5. It's just there's a lot of chance to it. And every show is a little bit different. You know, some shows it's the producer or the editor that has a pick and they've got the budget for it. In it goes. My job is to license it and make sure that it's available. Other shows, we build things from scratch and we're involved with every part of the creative process. It's different every time.
Yes, and then writing upon Thomas's words, there is another very important aspect for all the bands and for all the managers here. Just like when we are willing to work for free, sometimes it really pays. If there is a project and somebody wants to take your music and there's not enough budget for it, I would say just stick with the opportunity, because you never know. You never know. I scored a movie out of friendship, and I knew that they had absolutely no budget for the music, and that film won an Oscar. And that's how it is. You just you ride with it, and then a lot of things happen out of that. And I worked for free on that film, and I'm happy.
Yeah, I work for free too. I don't license for free. I feel that everything should have a fee of some sort for it. But I do think at the same time, on certain films, you just don't have it, And if you have a director that's already in the hole and they're just trying to figure out how to finish their movie and they like your song, in my mind, look at it objectively and say, what am I losing here? And if you're composing, you're losing time and energy. But the idea being you're building a relationship. And that's a judgment call each time. I would say it's probably fair to say that most filmmakers are not exploiters of musicians or anybody else. They're just trying to get their films done. And I would just ask that honest question of how can we make this work? And if someone says, look, I don't have any money, but I can take you out to a really nice dinner, hold them to the really nice dinner.
Yes.
You mentioned that when you license a cover, the MFN rule, the most favored nation rule, doesn't really apply because you get the recording cheaper. And I'm curious because as far as I know, usually first, according to the most favored nation rules, the publishing side's money is repeated on the recording side. So if it's a famous song but not a famous cover, how do you work with it? Like, do you contact publishing first, or you and then accordingly the label?
Usually in that direction. I mean, MFN is really nothing more than a luxury. There's no rule to it. It's just a practice, and the idea being that for the sake of simplicity, people generally will say that the master recording is as important as the songwriting, and it's really a way of efficiently being able to clear it. So if you have $5,000, you say, okay, $2,500 for the master, $2,500 for the publishing. If you have a very big copyright, a big song, it's not fair or even appropriate to make those equal, because the truth is we are now bringing in something that has notoriety, that has history, to an artist that may not be known. So we will probably go in first and clear the publishing and find out what the cost is, and then go back to the master and say, here's what we have left. Because if someone comes back with, I'm hoping to spend $10,000, and they come back with $12,500, well, I'm no longer offering $5,000, I'm now offering $2,500. And it's really up to the artist to say, look, the opportunity is worth it, and $2,500 is a good thing. So it really ends up becoming that factor, because we have less control over the publishing of big songs.
And it's also tricky. I mean, MFN is really a tricky business. I mean, sometimes the labels love to have the MFN clause in the contract, because it's really, you are legally obliged to match, and that's when the indirect bidding starts. You know, you got 25, you got 5,000, 25, 2,500, 2,500, 5,000 easy. But then the publisher said, no, we want 5,000. So you, out of the 5,000, you have to match that with the master side. So you actually bumping up twice the price. I mean, you're looking at a $10,000 license if the MFN clause is there. And for covers, when I did covers, usually this is the route, really. Get the publishing, and then if you need to cover, then you'll find the most appropriate ways to cover through professionals, or you go back to the master and just say this is all we have.
Many deals have died because someone put an MFN clause and they said, well, it has to be MFN publishing. And if that's the situation, it gives us less wiggle room, and so then the choice really is there another choice that makes more sense? So I don't dissuade people from doing MFN. If the songwriter or the song and the artist are kind of commensurate in renown, then it's perfectly appropriate. But if you've got a big song and you're trying to get the same rate, you may very well lose the sync, because it feels unfair, it feels inappropriate. So we do really operate, it sounds crazy, but music supervisors, and I think all people who work in the licensing world, it's an ecosystem, and we want it to be balanced. We want everyone to make money, we want it to work for everybody. When someone comes blazing in with a new set of rules, they usually turn everybody off, and that's sort of how they quickly become irrelevant. Nobody likes to license Kanye West songs, because Kanye doesn't clear anything. So you have to now literally go through this huge effort to clear a Kanye song, and at the end of the day, it's not worth it. There's much more interesting artists out there than Kanye West. So it becomes a situation where it's like, you know what, fuck Kanye, let's just find something else.
Yeah, and another aspect comes in when you have the master, and then it formerly was BMG, then it was Sony, and then it was Columbia Records, and then you have this whole array of like 3 different major publishers. I mean the record labels behind the master, and then you have to do each and every one of them, and each and every one of them with the MFN clause will up the price. So that was the kind of issue. Yeah.
I think, Thomas, you said that genres are pretty abstract. I totally agree. I work for the Polish Music Export Office, so we've had some contact with music supervisors. But usually, and these were people from LA, they write to us, give us something that's Eurodance, or I don't know, they come up with a genre, right? And for us, that might be something totally different than for them. So I wanted to ask, like, where's this golden middle,
Ah, the golden middle. Where is the golden middle?
Because for them, it might be something completely different. It's different when they write, we need something for a boxing scene or whatever, and do you have any Polish artists that could be for this? But
I'm always looking for Polish Eurodance for my boxing scene, so that works out well.
No, and I think it was totally 2 different things, but...
No, you make a good point. The tricky thing in a way is, think of it this way, the metadata is there for the sake of searching, right? So if I search through my system, I don't use iTunes anymore, I use a program called Swinzian, but it works the same way. So if I do a search, I like having what place it's from. So again, if it's in English, it may be less relevant, but it's interesting to be like, oh, it's from Poland. So now if I know that the band is from Poland, that's an interesting bit of information in my metadata. The genre place is a perfectly good place to have it. So I might say World, Europe, Pop, Poland, or World, Europe, Poland, Pop, and then I might be like, oh, you know, I don't know, female vocalist. You can pick and choose what those elements are. Like for instance, I'm really right now into Qom, which is out of South Africa. It's spelled G-Q-O-M. Now, if I try to find Deep House South Africa, I'm probably gonna have a hard time finding it, but if I put G-Q-O-M there, boom, it's easy to find. You know, Baile Funk from Rio, you can find that really easily by using those key phrases. So it's tricky. On one level, if you put 80 different words into the genre, you might show up on more lists, but it's also a little bit like, this isn't really all those things. So to me, it's kind of like saying, okay, what are the key ingredients that you know? You say, all right, it's in the funk genre, funk should be in there. Is it you know, from a certain country? That's key information. Is there a male vocalist? That could be key information. Or is it sung in a different language? That's helpful. Zulu, so you're like, oh, it's in Zulu. So the idea being that when I'm looking for Zulu, I can find it. Also, I really encourage people to put the years in because we do a lot of searches by years. And sometimes if I'm going randomly through a section, it can be helpful where I think, you know what, God bless you, 1992 is like a year that had a certain kind of energy or a vibe. I might be landing on something that's from another country, but it's instrumental, and it does something, in a way, captures that time period. So I really think that using your metadata as a creative tool is really helpful.
I was just curious to hear whether there are any types of emotions or scenes or genres that are harder to find for you. I've heard before that some music supervisors have said that, you know, everybody always comes with their epic love ballads or something like that, but there's like not enough for like upbeat stuff or so on. Are there some, you know, specific scenes or emotions that are harder maybe to find?
I would say no. I think that a good music supervisor can cover any terrain. Sometimes songwriters will ask that question because they want to write songs in the genre that somehow are going to be, not that I'm implying that that was your question, but I think that the truth is we respond to music that is great and that is genuine. I'm always
very important.
Yeah, and I think that the problem that we have is we do get sent a lot of music that is made, you know, it's like, I have this really amazing hip hop track and it was made in Ventura County, California, and you're like, sometimes Ventura County, California has good hip hop, but sometimes it doesn't. Or, you know, it will have a certain quality to it. Like if I respond, like here, British hip hop is a good example. British hip hop is different than American hip hop. And it's very hard if you have an American film with American hip hop culture to throw a British song in there easily and not have it stick out somehow. And it has to do with just cultural elements. So in a way, I think that if it's genuine, then it will land where it lands. And if it's being made as let's find an emotional, romantic, big song, if it feels like it's being manufactured, it's not going to resonate. If it feels like it comes from a truthful place, it will resonate and somebody will find it. Any other questions? Oh, I guess we can't. Sorry, our host has told us we can't talk.
Yeah. Thanks very much everyone for coming. Thanks Esther for helping us organizing it. Thomas Ádám for doing the workshops. It was really great and everyone who participated. Stay for the next programs. And come for the shows tonight.